frame.
Wow.
It's visually striking and conceptually fascinating.
I'm already so curious to hear more about this artwork and how it connects to everything we've been talking about, but I think this is a good place to kind of pause for now.
Okay?
This has been a lot to take in.
Yeah.
It's crazy how we started with this idea of photography and ended up talking about these hidden systems of power that shape how we see and understand the world.
It is, and we're just getting started.
That's right. So before the break, we were talking about this idea of framing in art history and how it relates to power dynamics.
Right.
It sounds like there's a lot more to unpack there.
Yeah, there really is.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it this way. Who gets to decide which artists are considered important, which movements are worthy of study,
Yeah.
even which pieces end up being displayed in museums.
Right.
These decisions aren't made in a vacuum.
Yeah.
They're influenced by, those who hold positions of authority within the art world.
And those positions of authority, they haven't always been accessible to everyone, right? Like
Yeah.
historically, it's been a pretty exclusive club.
Absolutely. And that historical exclusion has had a huge impact on how art history has been shaped.
Right.
It's why we're seeing this push now to kind of re-examine the canon,
Yeah.
to include more diverse voices and perspectives, because those voices have always been there.
Right.
They just haven't always been given the same platform.
And it goes back to what we were talking about with photography, how power influences not just what we see, but how we see it.
Exactly.
It's about who gets to control the narrative.
It is, and that's where Baldessari's Two Crowds artwork comes in.
Okay.
It's such a brilliant visual representation of this concept of framing and how it shapes our understanding.
Okay, remind me again what this artwork actually looks like.
Okay, so you have these two photographs,
Right.
seemingly unrelated. Maybe one is of a crowd at a sporting event,
Right.
and the other is of a protest or something.
Okay.
And these two images are placed side by side, but they're separated by a thick white frame.
So he's literally highlighting the act of separating them, of creating a division.
Exactly. And by doing so, he's asking us to consider how that act of framing, of categorizing,
Right.
influences our understanding of what we're seeing.
Yeah.
Do we view these two crowds differently because they've been placed in these separate frames?
Right.
Do we make assumptions about the people in each crowd based on how they've been categorized?
It's like the frame itself becomes part of the artwork, part of the meaning.
Yeah, exactly. And what's really fascinating is that Tagg takes this concept of the frame beyond the art world.
Oh.
He argues that we use frames to understand the world around us all the time. We categorize information, we create narratives,
Right.
and those frames really shape our perceptions.
So it's not just about literal frames around artwork.
Yeah.
It's about like the mental frameworks we use to make sense of the world.
Exactly. Think about how we categorize people based on their appearance, their profession, their social group.
Yeah.
These are all frames that we use often unconsciously to make sense of the world around us. But it's important to remember that these frames are not neutral.
Right.
They're shaped by our experiences, our biases, and the larger cultural narratives that we've been exposed to.
So you're saying that even when we think we're being objective,
Yeah.
we're actually looking at the world through these lenses that have been shaped by forces outside of ourselves.
Exactly. And this raises some really important questions. Whose frames are we using? Are we aware of the power dynamics that shape those frames? Or are we unknowingly perpetuating systems of control?
Whoa, those are some big questions. It's like you've handed me this magnifying glass, and now I'm seeing all these hidden layers of meaning and power dynamics everywhere I look.
And that's the power of critical thinking.
Right.
It allows us to see beyond the surface, to question our assumptions, and to become more aware of the forces that shape our understanding of the world.
It's like we've gone on this journey from this guy posing in an Arab costume
Yeah.
to realizing that photos themselves aren't the problem. It's how they're used,
Right.
how they're framed, and the power dynamics that underpin those choices.
Exactly. And what's so valuable about Tagg's work is that he doesn't offer any easy answers or solutions.
Right.
Instead, it gives us these tools to question our assumptions and become more critical consumers of visual information. He's encouraging us to ask, what are the frames I'm using?
Right.
And are they serving me, or are they serving someone else's agenda?
That's such a powerful takeaway.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of something you said earlier, that power isn't always overt or coercive.
Right.
Sometimes it's subtle.
Yeah,
It's embedded in the very ways we see and understand the world.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And recognizing those subtle forms of power is the first step towards challenging them.
It feels like we've been peeling back layers of an onion this whole time.
Yeah.
Like we started with this idea of photography and power,
Uh-huh.
and now we're talking about these frames
Right.
that shape how we see the world, not just in art, but like in everyday life.
Yeah.
It's kind of mind-blowing.
It really is. And what's so powerful about this concept of framing is that, once you start to see it,
Yeah,
you can't unsee it.
right.
It changes how you interact with the world, how you consume information, even the way you think about, your own beliefs and assumptions.
Okay, so let's say I'm ready to like embrace this new awareness.
Yeah.
What can I actually do with this knowledge? How can I become more aware of these frames and like their influence?
That's the question, isn't it? And there's no one-size-fits-all answer.
Right.
But I think a good starting point is to just cultivate a sense of critical awareness,
Okay.
to constantly question what you see,
Mm-hmm.
to ask yourself, who benefits from this representation?
Right.
Like, what's the agenda here?
So it's about being more like more intentional about the information we consume.
Exactly.
So whether it's a news photo or an advertisement, a social media post, even something as simple as like a billboard,
Yeah,
we should be asking ourselves, what's the story being told here and who's telling it?
exactly. And it's not just about, external sources of information.
Right.
It's also about recognizing our own biases, our own frames of reference, and how they shape our interpretations.
Uh-huh.
We all come to the table with our own experiences, our own beliefs,
Right.
and those things inevitably kind of color how we see the world.
So part of it is like self-reflection too,
Yes.
like turning that critical lens inward
Absolutely.
and examining our own assumptions.
Exactly. It's about asking yourself, what are the stories I'm telling myself about the world?
Right.
Where did those stories come from? And are they serving me or are they limiting me?
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. It feels like we've gone from just like looking at photographs to understanding how entire societies construct meaning
Yeah.
and shape perceptions,
Mhm.
often in ways that we're not even aware of.
Yeah, it's like we've unlocked this secret code,
Mm-hmm.
this hidden language of power that's embedded in the visual world around us.
Exactly. And while it can be a little overwhelming to realize how much we're influenced by these unseen forces,
Right.
it's also incredibly empowering because once we're aware of those forces, we can start to challenge them, to
Exactly.
make more conscious choices about how we interact with the world.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, I think John Tagg would be proud of us for taking this deep dive. We explored some really complex ideas, and hopefully we've all come away with a deeper understanding of the power of photography, the importance of critical thinking, and the hidden systems that shape our perceptions.
Absolutely. And if you're intrigued by these ideas, I highly encourage you to check out Tagg's book, The Disciplinary Frame.
Yeah.
It's a challenging read, but it's so worth it.
It is, and as always, the most important part of any deep dive is what you take away from it.
Right.
What frames have you become aware of? How has this conversation changed the way you see the world? And how will you use this knowledge to navigate life with more awareness and intention?
Yeah.
Those are the questions I want you to ponder as we wrap up this deep dive. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.